The City Children's Medical Center wasn't a gloomy place, not as much as a building often holding the pain and fear of its young patients could be. The walls were painted in light, soft green and yellow colors, adorned with drawings made by children's hands, crooked suns, awkward flowers, fantastical monsters that seemed more funny than scary. Laughter sometimes echoed in the corridors, but more often it was the sound of quiet crying, the soothing whispers of parents, or the muffled footsteps of staff hurrying to the next call. The smell here was unique, a mix of disinfectant, laundry detergent, hospital food, and a faint, persistent scent of medicine. It was a smell that clung to clothes and memory, the smell of a place where time flowed differently, slowly, drawing out when waiting for test results and lightning fast when the time for an unpleasant procedure approached. In this building, where each day was a battle and each small victory a true miracle, he lived. He didn't heal with pills or injections, didn't make diagnoses or perform surgeries. His weapons were a purr, soft fur, and an inexplicable sense of who needed his presence most at a particular moment. His name was Jasper. No one knew exactly how he ended up here. One version told of a cold autumn evening when Jasper, then a thin and cautious ginger cat with matted fur, slipped through the doors of the emergency department, seeking shelter from a sudden rain. He was noticed by the night nurse, Helen, known for her strictness yet boundless kindness. Instead of chasing the unwelcome guest away, she offered him a saucer of milk. Jasper didn't leave. He stayed. At first, he hid under the stairs or in quiet corners, cautiously observing the bustling life of the hospital. Over time, he grew bolder. He began to explore the corridors, his fluffy ginger tail curving gently like a question mark. The staff grew used to him. Some grumbled about sanitation, but most simply smiled, seeing this fluffy wonder amidst the sterile walls. Jasper didn't bother anyone. He didn't beg for food, though he wouldn't refuse treats, didn't scratch the furniture, didn't mark his territory. He simply was. But soon it became clear that his presence wasn't just being. It was something more. Nurse Anna first noticed it by chance. She was walking down the corridor to room 7, where little Ethan lay, only 4 years old. Ethan suffered from severe stomach pains and cried almost constantly, exhausting himself and his young mother. Medicine offered only temporary relief, and the fear and discomfort always returned. Ethan's mother, Sarah, sat by his bed, pale from lack of sleep and helplessness, trying to soothe her son. When Anna opened the door, she saw an unusual sight. Jasper, whom she usually saw sleeping somewhere quiet, sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, carefully grooming his paw. He wasn't looking at the child, he was just nearby. Ethan wasn't crying. He lay on his side, his small hand extended towards Jasper, his fingers gently touching his fluffy side. The cat seemed to slightly flinch at the touch, but didn't move away. Ethan's mother quietly said, He's been here for 10 minutes now. And Ethan calmed down. He hasn't cried since the cat came in. There was incredible surprise and fragile hope in her voice. Anna felt something warm spread in her chest. She had worked at this hospital for 5 years and had seen a lot of pain. She knew how hard it was to find anything that would bring a child relief when even medicine didn't help with the fear. And here, a cat? An ordinary ginger cat. She walked closer. Jasper lifted his head, his large green eyes looked calmly at Anna and then refocused on Ethan. Anna noted to herself that his fur no longer looked matted, but had become thick and shiny, as if he had found not only shelter here, but also purpose. From that day on, Anna began to observe Jasper more closely. She noticed that he didn't just wander aimlessly. He chose who to go to. He might pass by one room where children were playing happily, but stop outside another, from which no sound came, or where tension or sadness lingered. He would sit by the door as if waiting for permission, or quietly slip inside if the door was ajar. His presence was unobtrusive. He didn't demand attention, but was always ready to give it. Jasper's purr became a familiar background sound in some rooms, quiet, soothing, like a lullaby without words. Life at the children's hospital had its rhythm. Morning rounds by doctors, the bustle during breakfast, quiet hours for procedures, afternoon rest, visiting hours, evening preparations for sleep. And amidst this rhythm, like a ginger ray of sunshine, Jasper weaved. He knew the schedule better than some of the interns. He knew when it was time for dressings and could sit by the bed, distracting the child with his presence. He knew when it was quiet hour and could find the most comfortable spot on the windowsill, warming himself in the sunlight that broke through the hospital windows. The staff began to treat him like a colleague, albeit a very unusual one. Doctors nodded to him as they walked down the corridor. Nurses might leave a small bowl of water or dry food near his favorite spot by the nurses' station. Cleaners, who initially grumbled, eventually began to affectionately pet him when he rubbed against their legs. There were, of course, those who were against it. The head nurse, Mrs. Evelyn Reed, an older woman with an unwavering belief in order and sterility, initially demanded that this breeding ground for bacteria be immediately removed. But she witnessed several times how Jasper calmed a child throwing a tantrum before an injection, or how his purr helped a toddler suffering from pain fall asleep. Her heart, hidden behind a shield of rules, slowly began to thaw. She still grumbled, but her demands became less categorical. Well, just make sure he doesn't get underfoot and doesn't get into the treatment room, might come from her lips, which was almost permission. Jasper, it seemed, understood his duties. He never tried to enter the intensive care unit or the operating block. He stuck to the pediatric wards where there were children who could consciously feel his warmth and calm. For many children, Jasper became more than just a cat in the hospital. He became a friend who didn't ask questions about their diagnosis, didn't cause pain, didn't demand them to be a good patient. He simply loved. His big green eyes looked with understanding, and his soft fur was the embodiment of safety. In room 12 lay Lily, a 7-year-old girl with a long braid, who rarely lifted her eyes and spoke only in a whisper, if she spoke at all. Her illness required long-term treatment, and the hospital had become a prison for her. She missed her home, her toys, her cat Mittens, who stayed at home. Lily barely interacted with anyone, refused to play with other children, her face constantly furrowed. Jasper's appearance in her life happened gradually. At first, he just walked past her open door. Then he began to stop, sitting by the threshold, as if studying something. Lily noticed him, her eyes briefly lingering on the ginger silhouette. One day, Jasper dared to enter. He didn't go straight to the bed. He cautiously walked around the room, sniffed the legs of the bedside table, looked out the window. Lily watched him, not saying a word. Then Jasper jumped onto the chair beside her bed and curled up. He didn't try to touch her, just peacefully slept, purring softly. This purr was the only sound in the room besides her own breathing. Lily felt a strange warmth. It reminded her of Mittens of home. She quietly reached out her hand and carefully, barely noticeably, stroked the air above the cat. Jasper didn't react, just continued to sleep and purr. But the next day, he came again. Thus began their quiet friendship. Jasper came to Lily every day. He never stayed long, but his presence was constant and calming. Lily began to wait for him. Her face became a little less furrowed. And one day, as Jasper slept on the chair, she quietly, in a barely audible whisper, said, "Hello, Jasper." The cat lifted his head, blinked his green eyes, as if understanding, and fell back asleep. But Anna, who was entering the room, heard it and almost cried with joy. It was the first word Lily had spoken unnecessarily in weeks. Max was 10, and he'd broken his leg falling awkwardly from a tree. It was his first time in a hospital, and he hated every minute of it. Not the pain itself, though that was bad enough, but the feeling of helplessness and boredom. And fear. Fear of the cast, of the x-rays, of the doctors in white coats who seemed so serious. And most of all, fear of the surgery the doctors were talking about. Max was an active, loud boy who never sat still. His energy had no outlet in the small hospital room. He tugged at the blanket, grumbled at the nurses, refused to eat the hospital food, and endlessly asked his mom when he could leave. His mother, Sarah, tried to be patient, but Max's irritation rubbed off on her. Jasper appeared in their room on Max's third day in the hospital. It was the morning before another doctor's visit, and Max was particularly agitated. He sat on the bed, clenching his fists, his face tense. The room door was ajar, and Jasper cautiously poked his head in. His green eyes surveyed the room. Max noticed him and tensed up even more. He had never owned a cat and was wary of them. "Here, kitty," Sarah called out timidly. Jasper turned his head towards her but didn't approach. He was looking at Max. Max turned away, pretending not to care, but watched the cat out of the corner of his eye. Jasper entered, walked along the wall, sniffed the leg of the bedside table, and stopped a few steps from Max's bed. He sat on the floor, gracefully tucking his paws under him, and began to groom himself, showing complete indifference to the presence of people. Max watched him for a while. How Jasper meticulously licked his paw, then rubbed it behind his ear. It was a distraction. The tension on Max's face eased slightly. "Look, Max, how clean he is," Sarah said softly. Max didn't answer, but continued to watch. Jasper suddenly stopped grooming, looked at Max, stood up, stretched his whole body, arching his back, and unhurriedly approached the bed. He cautiously jumped onto the free edge of the mattress, bypassed the cast on Max's leg, and neatly settled next to his thigh, curling up into a ball. He didn't demand to be petted, just lay there. Max froze. He felt the warmth of the fluffy body through the thin hospital blanket. Jasper began to purr. It was a strong, deep purr. It vibrated and seemed to transfer to Max. It was a strange feeling, as if a small engine had started right next to him. The fear that gripped Max's chest began to slowly recede, replaced by curiosity and a new sense of comfort. He cautiously lowered his hand and timidly touched the soft ginger fur on Jasper's back. The cat didn't react, only his purr grew louder. Max began to pet him. Hesitantly at first, then more boldly. The fur was incredibly soft and warm. He buried his fingers deeper, massaging the cat's back. Jasper stretched out, offering his side, then his neck, to Max's hand. When the doctor entered the room, Max was so engrossed in petting Jasper that he barely paid attention to the white coat. He listened to the doctor absent-mindedly, his hand automatically stroking the cat. Sarah watched her son with surprise. For the first time in 3 days, he showed no signs of panic before interacting with the doctor. Jasper stayed in Max's room for about half an hour, then just as quietly as he appeared, he jumped off the bed and went about his business. But his visit left a mark. Max couldn't stop talking about that ginger cat. He asked if Jasper would come back. The fear of surgery hadn't completely disappeared, but now there was a small opening in it for another feeling. For curiosity, for the anticipation of a fluffy friend. Jasper's visits became part of Max's hospital routine, the most pleasant part. The cat usually came at the same time in the morning after the doctor's rounds and in the evening before dinner. He never stayed too long, but each appearance was a small holiday for Max. Max began to wait for him. He even started eating the hospital porridge in the morning to have the strength to pet Jasper when he comes. Sarah couldn't get enough of it. She saw how her son was changing, how the tension fell from his shoulders when the cat entered the room, how his eyes lit up with joy. He and Jasper developed their own rituals. Jasper always jumped onto the bed from the same side, carefully bypassed the cast, and settled beside Max. Max always started petting him on the back, then moved to the sensitive spots, behind the ears, under the chin. Jasper responded with a loud purr, sometimes rolling onto his back, exposing his belly, a sign of the highest trust. One day, Max drew Jasper, a large ginger cat with huge green eyes and a fluffy tail. He showed the drawing to Jasper when he came. The cat sniffed the paper, rubbed against Max's hand, and purred. Max was sure he liked it. He decided to give this drawing to Jasper. Dr. Emily Roberts also noticed the changes in Max. He became calmer before procedures, answered questions more willingly. One day, she found Jasper in Max's room and smiled. "Wow, you have your own personal therapist here," she said. Max proudly nodded. "That's Jasper. He's my friend." "I see. And he's a great help, Max," the doctor said, stroking Max's head. She understood that sometimes a fluffy friend could do more than any medicine or talk. The fear of surgery still hung in the air, but now Max seemed more ready for it, braver. His hand, which used to clench into a fist from fear, now calmly stroked the ginger fur, finding solace and strength in it. Not everyone at the hospital was thrilled with Jasper's presence. Although most of the staff had gotten used to him and even loved him, the administration received complaints. Some parents worried about hygiene. One of the young doctors, Dr. Miller, was allergic and voiced his dissatisfaction at every opportunity. "We can't have animals in the hospital. It violates all sanitary norms," he argued heatedly at a meeting. "What if a child has an allergy? Or he brings something in?" The chief doctor, Dr. Eleanor Vance, a wise woman who had to adhere to the rules, listened attentively. She herself had seen how Jasper affected the children, but also understood the concerns. Nurse Anna, having become Jasper's unofficial advocate, joined the conversation. "Dr. Vance, we understand the concern, but you must see the impact he has. Children who cry all day calm down. Those who refuse to eat start eating when he's around." Lily Adams, who barely spoke, started whispering, talking to him. Max Williams, who panicked before every checkup, now calmly pets the cat. "This cannot be ignored." She gave several concrete examples, telling stories about Ethan, about other children. Nurse Helen, the night nurse who first sheltered Jasper, confirmed her words, telling how Jasper helped her cope with difficult night shifts herself. Dr. Miller snorted dismissively. "Emotions? We need facts, not emotions. Where are the studies? Where's the proof that this doesn't cause harm?" "The proof is in the children's eyes, doctor." Nurse Helen couldn't help but exclaim. "And in how they start recovering faster." The meeting ended without a final decision, but the threat of Jasper's eviction loomed. Anna and several other staff members decided to act. They began to collect unofficial evidence, recording observations, taking pictures, when permitted and not intrusive, talking to parents who were grateful to Jasper. They wanted to present a compelling case to the administration. Jasper, unaware of the bureaucratic storms raging around his fate, continued his quiet mission. He walked the corridors, purred, warmed small tired hands with his body, and simply was present, a fluffy therapist whose impact was difficult to measure but impossible to deny to those who saw it. The next visit to Max's room was somewhat different. Max was preparing for surgery the next day. He was tense again, his face pale. Jasper entered, as always, but this time he didn't just lie next to him. He carefully approached Max and began to rub his head against his hand, purring particularly loudly. Then he jumped onto Max's chest, as much as was possible given the cast on his leg, and settled there, his warm body comforting Max through his pajamas. Max carefully hugged Jasper. He buried his face in his soft fur and inhaled deeply, the smell of home comfort, the smell of warmth and peace. He felt tears welling up, but they were tears not only of fear, but also of emotion, of gratitude to this ginger angel. He stroked Jasper, feeling his heart rate gradually slow down. "I'm scared, Jasper," he whispered into the ginger fur. Jasper just pressed against him harder and purred, as if saying, "I know, but you're not alone." In that moment, Max felt that he wasn't so alone in his fear. There was someone warm, alive, who accepted him as he was, with all his fears. And that gave him strength. Nurse Anna became the voice of those who believed in Jasper. She felt a personal responsibility for the ginger cat who had brought so much light into dark days. After that meeting with the chief doctor and the young allergic doctor, Dr. Miller, Anna realized that she couldn't just sit back. The threat of Jasper's eviction was real. Her workday was already stressful, filled with caring for the young patients. But now another mission was added to it, to gather as much evidence as possible that Jasper was not just a cat, but a valuable team member who helped in treatment, albeit through unconventional methods. Anna talked to the parents. Most of them were grateful to Jasper. Ethan's mother recounted how his purr calmed her son during the most difficult moments. Sarah, Max's mother, with shining eyes, described how the cat helped her son cope with the fear of surgery. "He's not just a cat, Nurse Anna. He seems to know when he's needed." How he lay on Max's chest before the surgery. I'll never forget that. Parents of children who had already been discharged shared their stories by phone or in short letters that Anna carefully collected. The stories were different, but the essence was the same. The presence of the ginger cat brought joy, peace, and a sense of normalcy to the abnormal hospital life. Anna also collected observations from the staff. Old Nurse Helen kept her own Jasper diary, recording who he visited, how long he stayed, and what reaction it caused. Other nurses and cleaners added their stories, how Jasper sat by the bed of a girl with a high fever until she fell asleep, how he accompanied them during night rounds, as if guarding the ward, how he found the saddest children and simply lay nearby. Even some doctors, who initially were skeptical about the idea of a cat in the hospital, began to change their minds. Pediatrician Dr. Emily Roberts openly supported Anna. "I see the impact, Anna. I see how the children cry less before procedures, how they become more open. Of course, we can't replace medicine with a cat, but if he speeds up emotional recovery, reduces stress, that's also treatment, isn't it?" But Dr. Miller stood his ground. Emotions, allergies, infections. We can't give in to sentimentality when it comes to children's health. Rules are rules. The rules should serve the children, not the other way around, doctor, one of the nurses retorted heatedly. Anna prepared a report. She gathered all the testimonies from parents and staff, added information she found online about the experience of using therapy animals in other countries, although she understood that they didn't have an official program, and Jasper was a unique case. She emphasized that Jasper was healthy, regularly examined by a veterinarian, secretly funded by all the staff, that hygiene measures in the ward were reinforced, and that children with cat allergies were placed in separate rooms that Jasper didn't access. Her arguments were strong, supported by touching stories and facts. But would it be enough to convince the administration, which operated under strict protocols? The day the final decision regarding Jasper's fate was to be made was tense. Anna was more nervous than ever. She felt as if she was defending not just a cat, but something much more, a piece of the soul of this place, a symbol of hope that had unexpectedly appeared here and taken root. Chief Dr. Eleanor Vance gathered a small meeting, a few doctors, senior nurses, the hospital's lawyer, and Dr. Miller himself, who looked like a winner, confident in his righteousness. Anna presented her report. She spoke about Lily, about Max, about Ethan, about dozens of other children whose days Jasper had made a little brighter. She read excerpts from parents' letters, her voice trembling with emotion. "We understand your arguments, Anna," said Dr. Vance, her voice calm but tired. "And we see the positive impact. But there are rules. There is responsibility. If something happens, an allergic reaction, a complication." "But nothing has happened," one of the nurses exclaimed. "He's been here for months. And he only helps." Dr. Miller interjected, "Months? That's not a measure. We cannot risk children's health for experiments. It's not sterile. It's unacceptable." The word unacceptable cut Anna like a knife. She looked at Dr. Miller, at his cold, unyielding face. And suddenly she understood that his arguments weren't just about rules. Perhaps he simply didn't see, or didn't want to see, the miracle that happened every day in the rooms. He saw only potential problems. Tension in the room grew. It seemed that Dr. Miller's rational arguments outweighed Anna's emotional testimonies. The lawyer nodded, confirming the talk of risks and responsibility. Anna felt despair. Was it all in vain? Would Jasper simply be thrown out onto the street, back into the cold and uncertainty? She took a deep breath and decided to make one last attempt. Dr. Vance, colleagues, she began more softly, but her voice was firm. We talk about rules and risks. And that is important. But we are forgetting something equally important. The emotional state of our patients. Their will to live, to fight. You know that stress and sadness slow down recovery. And joy, peace, a sense of safety, on the contrary, help. She looked at everyone present. Jasper doesn't heal physically. He heals souls. He gives these children what we, with all our medicines and procedures, often cannot give: unconditional love and simply the warmth of a living being nearby. He reminds them of home, of normal life. He makes them smile when there seems to be no reason to smile. I understand the rules. But isn't our main rule to do everything possible for the child's well-being? And if a fluffy cat makes them happier, calmer, stronger in the face of trials, isn't that a strong argument? Can't we find a way to do it safely, instead of simply forbidding it? Silence fell in the room. Even Dr. Miller was silent. Dr. Vance looked at her hands, folded on the table. She was the chief doctor. She bore the responsibility. But she was also a woman who had seen Jasper in action, had seen his impact. The moment lasted an eternity. Then Dr. Vance lifted her eyes. There was a trace of thought on her face, and something else, something softer than expected. We need to discuss this in more detail, considering all aspects, she said, addressing the lawyer. Perhaps there is a possibility to develop a special protocol. Establish clear rules for his stay. Regular veterinary checkups, defined access zones, informing parents. Dr. Miller wanted to say something, but Dr. Vance stopped him with a gesture. The question is not closed, but we will consider the possibility of creating conditions for his stay if it complies with all necessary safety standards. Anna, I ask you to prepare proposals for such a protocol. Detailed ones, considering all the risks Dr. Miller mentioned. It wasn't a final permission, but it was hope. A small crack in the wall of bureaucracy. The fight wasn't over, but the first, hardest battle seemed to have been won. The following weeks were filled with work. Anna, Nurse Helen, and several other enthusiasts developed that very protocol. They consulted with veterinarians, studied international experience, thought through every detail, from Jasper's vaccination schedule to the places where he could sleep and how often the areas of his stay needed to be cleaned. They even proposed introducing a special bracelet for children with allergies, which would signal staff about the need to keep Jasper away from that room. Dr. Miller was still skeptical, but not as aggressive. Perhaps he too was starting to see how the children reacted to Jasper, or he was simply tired of arguing. Finally, the protocol was ready. It was detailed, strict, but realistic. Dr. Vance carefully studied it. She saw how much effort these people had put in so that their fluffy therapist could stay. She saw the support from many parents. The final decision was announced a few weeks later, quietly, without unnecessary fanfare. Jasper was allowed to stay, officially, as a staff therapy cat on a trial basis. According to the newly developed protocol, it was an unprecedented case for their hospital. The news quickly spread through the ward. The children rejoiced. The staff hugged. Anna felt a huge relief and tears welled up in her eyes. They had done it. They had defended their ginger hero. Life in the hospital continued. The usual sounds still echoed in the corridors. The familiar smells lingered. But now this place felt a little warmer. Knowing that Jasper was officially here, that he was a part of this hospital, gave both the children and the staff an extra drop of hope. Jasper seemed not to notice the change in his status. He still slipped under the nurse's feet, warmed himself on the windowsills, explored new corners. But his work became even more important. He became a symbol, a symbol that even in the most difficult circumstances, there is room for compassion, for unexpected joy, for fluffy warmth that can heal not only the body but also the soul. He continued his rounds. He visited Lily, who now smiled at him aloud and told him her little secrets. He visited Max, who was recovering from surgery and now allowed Jasper to sleep right on his non-casted leg. He found new children who had just arrived at the hospital, frightened and lonely, and offered them his quiet, unconditional friendship. His fluffy tail, gently curving as he walked, became a familiar and calming sight in the corridors of the children's hospital. He didn't speak human language, didn't understand complex medical terms, but he spoke the language of the heart, the language of warmth and presence. And that language was enough to become an unspoken hero for those who needed it most. One evening, as the hospital was slowly falling asleep, Anna walked down an empty corridor. She stopped by Lily's room. The girl was asleep, and next to her on the chair, curled up, slept Jasper. His purr was quiet, barely audible, but it filled the room with peace. Anna stood for a while, watching them. She thought about all the difficulties they had gone through so this ginger cat could stay here. She thought about all the children he had helped. About Max, about Ethan, about Lily, about those who had been discharged, and about those who were yet to arrive. She smiled softly. In a world where there was so much pain and uncertainty, there was Jasper, a small fluffy ray of hope who had found his place where he was needed most. He wasn't big and strong, but his presence made others strong. He was a true therapist, a true hero. Anna quietly closed the door to the room, leaving Lily and Jasper in their quiet, warm world. She walked down the corridor to the nurse's station, feeling tired but also deeply satisfied. Her fight had meaning. Every step she took, every word she spoke, every story she collected, it all led to the fact that now within the walls of this hospital, in that small room, a cat was sleeping, a cat who brought healing just by being there. And that was the greatest miracle of all. Sophia was 14, and she thought the hospital was the worst place in the world. Not just because of her illness, she had a complex chronic kidney condition, but because here she felt isolated, misunderstood, and terribly lonely. Her friends were at school, living their lives, while she was stuck here, between four walls, among crying toddlers and worried adults. She had withdrawn into herself. She answered nurses' blunt questions monosyllabically, argued with her parents or ignored them, spent most of her time lying in bed listening to music on headphones or staring at the ceiling. She had built an invisible wall around herself so that no one could reach her fears, her pain, and her deep sadness. She had seen the ginger cat wandering the corridors. She regarded him with indifference. Another element of this strange, alien world. She didn't need cats. She needed freedom. Jasper, however, had his own opinion. He often sat near the door of her room, as if waiting for an invitation that never came. Sophia noticed him out of the corner of her eye but didn't react. One day, Jasper finally dared to enter. The door was ajar, and he quietly slipped inside. Sophia was lying in bed, turned towards the wall, headphones in her ears. She didn't hear him come in. Jasper carefully jumped onto the windowsill and settled there, looking out at the world beyond the window, at the trees, at the birds, at a patch of sky. He didn't try to get her attention. He just was. An hour passed. The music in Sophia's headphones ended, and she didn't immediately turn on a new song. She lay in the silence, aware of the emptiness of the room. And then she heard a soft purr. Sophia slowly turned her head. The ginger cat was sitting on the windowsill, illuminated by the rays of the evening sun. He looked peaceful and calm. His purr was quiet but steady, like the distant murmur of a stream. It was the first sound in a long time that didn't remind her of the hospital. Not the beeping of machines, not the footsteps of nurses, not conversations about her illness. Just the sound of a living creature enjoying the moment. She watched him for a while. Then, without taking out the headphones, which were no longer playing anything, she quietly asked, "What are you doing here?" Jasper blinked his eyes, turned his head towards her, but didn't answer. Of course, he couldn't answer with words, but his purr grew a little louder. Sophia sighed. She turned back to the wall, but no longer felt such sharp loneliness. Someone else was in the room, someone who didn't ask questions, didn't demand smiles, didn't pity her. Just was. Jasper stayed in her room for about an hour, then jumped off the windowsill and quietly left. The next day, he came again. And again. Gradually, Sophia began to get used to his presence. She no longer put on her headphones immediately after waking up, waiting to see if the ginger guest would come. When he came, she might turn to face the room. Sometimes she even swung her legs off the bed to be closer to the windowsill. One day, she dared to talk to him again. She told him about her day, about how tired she was of hospital food, about how much she missed her friends. She spoke softly, as if sharing a secret. Jasper listened, his eyes narrowed, his purr her only conversational partner. Talking to the cat was easier than talking to people. He didn't interrupt, didn't give advice, didn't look at her with pity. He just listened, his presence grounding. The wall Sophia had built began to show cracks. Small, barely noticeable, but they were there. Jasper's life at the hospital wasn't limited to visiting patients. He had his routine, his favorite spots, and his relationships with the staff. In the morning, he usually greeted the first employees arriving for their shift, purring and rubbing against their legs near the entrance to the pediatric ward. He usually had breakfast near the nurse's station, where his bowl of food and fresh water was always kept. The nurses took turns ensuring his meal was timely and complete. After breakfast, his workday began. He didn't follow a schedule made by humans. His schedule was written by invisible threads of the emotions and needs of the young patients. He might spontaneously enter a room where a child woke up crying or linger near the door of a room where silence, full of anxiety, reigned. His favorite spot for a daytime nap was the windowsill in the corridor near the large window overlooking a small hospital garden. Here he could doze in the sun, watch the birds, or simply observe the world changing beyond the glass, while the life of the hospital buzzed around him. Children being pushed in wheelchairs or taking their first uncertain steps after illness often stopped near him, reaching out to stroke his soft fur. Jasper never refused affection, his purr growing louder, as if greeting them. He also had a special connection with the cleaners. These women, whose work often went unnoticed, maintained cleanliness in the hospital, and they were the ones who worried most about Jasper's fate during the administrative struggle. Jasper often accompanied them during cleaning, carefully avoiding mops and buckets, as if inspecting their work. They talked to him in quiet voices, shared their worries, and found solace in his silent presence. In the evenings, when visitors had left and the hospital prepared for sleep, Jasper did his evening rounds. He peeked into the rooms, making sure everything was calm. His quiet steps and purr were often the last sounds the children heard before falling asleep. Sometimes he stayed in a room with a child who particularly needed him, sleeping quietly on a chair or near the bed, his presence as reliable as a nightlight. His sleep was deep and his purr constant. It seemed as if he was giving his energy of peace and healing to this place. Life in the hospital is an emotional roller coaster, where the joy of discharge is replaced by sadness over someone else's worsening condition. Jasper was a witness and participant in these emotional swings. He saw Max leave the room with a beaming face on crutches, hugging his mom tightly and promising to draw many more portraits of Jasper at home. Jasper sat by the door, as if seeing him off, and purred softly. Anna saw it and felt her heart squeeze, another child going home, healthy, and Jasper was a part of that story. He saw Lily becoming more open, starting to play with other children in the playroom, her laughter echoing through the corridors. She was still cautious, but no longer withdrawn. Her connection with Jasper remained special, Their quiet conversations on the windowsill became her daily therapy. But there were other moments. Moments when a room door remained closed longer than usual. Moments when nurses walked around with puffy eyes. Jasper seemed to sense this sadness. On such days, he might sit near the nurse's station, allowing the staff to pet him longer than usual, his purr becoming a quieter but more insistent comfort. He didn't understand the concept of death, but he understood pain. And he offered his quiet presence as solace. One day, a small boy, Leo, was brought to the hospital after a severe burn. He was crying from pain and fear. No one could calm him down. Medicine helped little. His parents were in despair. Anna, remembering Jasper's effect on Ethan, cautiously suggested trying it. With the doctor's and parents' permission, Anna brought Jasper to Leo's room. At first, the boy just cried louder, seeing the cat. But Jasper wasn't scared. He cautiously jumped onto the bed, away from the burned leg, and quietly lay down. He began to purr. The purr was loud, vibrating like a small natural tremor. Leo's parents and Anna watched with surprise. Gradually, the boy's cries became quieter, turning into whimpers, and then stopped altogether. He lay and listened to the purr, his little fists unclenched. Jasper stayed with him until the boy fell asleep, exhausted by pain and emotions. This scene became another proof of Jasper's unique gift, although it wasn't officially documented. Life went on. Jasper was an integral part of it. His fluffy presence became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the fact that even in the most difficult times, you can find comfort in the most unexpected things. He was a bridge between the world of pain and the world of normalcy, a reminder that beyond the hospital walls there is sun, warmth, and the simplicity of existence embodied in the purr of a ginger cat. The wall Sophia had built was high and seemed impregnable. But Jasper was a master at finding even the smallest cracks. His quiet visits to the windowsill of room 14 became regular. He didn't demand attention, he just was present, a warm, fluffy ginger patch that breathed and purred in a rhythm that seemed in tune with her own heart. Sophia began to allow herself more. She not only talked to him, telling him about her thoughts and feelings that she couldn't express to anyone else, but also began to cautiously pet him. At first, these were short, timid touches when Jasper was dozing. Then she might reach out and bury her fingers in his thick fur when he sat nearby, looking out the window. She noticed that Jasper never tried to get on her bed, although he willingly did so with the younger children. It was as if he sensed that she needed space, that her comfort zone ended at the edge of the bed. It was another confirmation of his amazing intuition. He respected her boundaries. One day, when Sophia felt particularly bad after another procedure, her mother sat nearby, trying to hold back tears. Sophia felt this tension, and it made her feel even worse. It was then that Jasper quietly appeared. He didn't go to the windowsill, but cautiously jumped onto the chair beside Sophia's bed. He sat there, his big green eyes looking alternately at Sophia and her mother. Then, doing something unexpected, he carefully approached Sophia's mother and began rubbing against her legs, purring loudly. Sophia's mother looked at the cat in surprise, then at her daughter. She leaned down and gently stroked Jasper. The cat pressed closer to her. The tension on the woman's face eased slightly. It was a brief but touching moment of connection that extended beyond the room, beyond the illness. Jasper seemed to remind them both that they were not alone in their pain. For Sophia, it was an important moment. She saw that Jasper was not only her cat, but also something more. He brought comfort not only to her, but also to her mother, who was also suffering. Her wall cracked further. She began to look at Jasper not just as a cat, but as her quiet accomplice, her secret therapist. He was the only one who knew about her true feelings, about her fear of an uncertain future, about her anger at the unfairness of her illness. Talking to him felt safe. Sophia's condition was complex. Doctors talked about the need for a kidney transplant in the future, but for now they were trying to control her condition with medication. The prospect of such a serious operation scared Sophia more than anything else. She tried not to think about it, but the thoughts kept returning, like dark birds. During these difficult periods, when she felt particularly bad or when doctors performed unpleasant examinations, Jasper seemed to sense it. He spent more time in her room. Sometimes he just slept on the windowsill, but his steady breathing and quiet purr were an anchor in the storm of her emotions. Sometimes he sat near the chair when she was sitting up, carefully placing a paw on her knee, as if saying, "I'm here." One day, Sophia took a risk. She picked up a notebook and pen and began to write. She wrote about her feelings, about her fear, about her hope. And she wrote about Jasper, how his presence helped her breathe when it seemed like the world was falling apart, how his purr chased away the darkness. She wrote about how he had become her only true friend in this hospital. She wasn't going to show it to anyone. It was just for her and maybe for Jasper. When Jasper came, she might read him excerpts, quietly, so no one would hear. The cat listened, his green eyes calm and attentive. It was their secret ritual. Her mother noticed that Sophia had become a little less withdrawn. She could answer questions with full sentences, sometimes even initiated a conversation about Jasper herself. It was small progress, but for her mother, huge. She knew it was the ginger cat's doing. The decision about the upcoming surgery was approaching. The atmosphere in the room became more tense. Sophia's parents visited more often, their faces filled with worry. Sophia began to build her wall again, bracing herself for the blow. She knew that even more pain, even more fear, awaited her. But now she had Jasper. After learning about the upcoming surgery, Sophia withdrew into herself again. The fear was overwhelming. She refused to eat, barely slept, put on her headphones again, and turned to the wall. Even Jasper had trouble reaching her. He came, sat on the windowsill, purred, but she didn't react. Anna, the nurse who knew about Sophia's special connection with Jasper, was worried. She knew how important a patient's emotional state was before such serious surgery. She saw how quickly the light in Sophia's eyes was dimming. "Jasper," Anna said softly to the cat one evening when he was sitting by the nurse's station. "Your friend Sophia is very scared. She needs you. More than ever." She understood she was talking to a cat, but for some reason, she was sure he understood. Jasper lifted his head, looked at Anna with his intelligent eyes, and then, to Anna's surprise, stood up and unhurriedly headed towards Sophia's room. The door was ajar. Jasper went in. Sophia was lying, as usual, turned away. Jasper approached the bed but didn't jump up. He cautiously placed his front paws on the edge of the mattress and quietly, insistently meowed. Sophia didn't move. Jasper meowed again, this time a little louder. Then he did something he had never done in her room before. He tried to jump onto the bed. It was awkward, he almost slipped, but finally, he succeeded. He carefully bypassed Sophia's legs and lay down beside her back, pressing against her with his whole body, and began to purr. This purr wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration of warmth and life that transferred through the blanket, through the pajamas, straight to her body. Sophia felt this quiet but powerful contact. She felt the weight of his body, the warmth of his fur. It was so unexpected, so real. She slowly turned. Jasper lifted his head. Their eyes met. There was no pity in his green eyes, only calm and some ancient wisdom. He purred. Sophia couldn't hold back. The wall finally crumbled. She carefully, with trembling hands, hugged Jasper. She buried her face in his soft fur and allowed herself to cry. It was a cry that had been building up for weeks, months, a cry of fear, of pain, of loneliness, of injustice. Jasper didn't try to escape. He just lay there, allowing her to cry into his fur, and purred. His purr grew louder, like a calming song. He seemed to absorb her pain, her fear, her tears. Her mother, who entered the room and saw the scene, stopped by the door, quietly crying along with her daughter. Anna, who had been observing all this from a distance, felt a tear roll down her cheek. That evening, Jasper didn't leave early. He stayed on Sophia's bed, his purr her last sensation before she finally fell asleep, for the first time in many days, without terrifying dreams. The next morning, Sophia woke up, feeling weak and exhausted after yesterday's tears, but with a strange sense of calm. The fear hadn't completely disappeared, but it was no longer overwhelming. Next to her, Jasper slept peacefully, his fluffy side rising and falling with his breath. She carefully stroked him. The cat woke up, stretched, and looked at her. Sophia smiled at him. For the first time in a long time, her smile was genuine, not forced. "Thank you, Jasper," she said softly. She knew that a difficult trial awaited her, surgery. But she wouldn't face it alone. She had a ginger, fluffy friend who had taught her that even through the thickest walls, warmth and light can break through. And that crying isn't weakness, but the beginning of healing. That night, that cry, and Jasper's quiet presence became a turning point for Sophia. She didn't stop being a sick girl in a hospital, but she stopped being lonely.